Alright, so in the previous video, what we did was we highlighted the power of server components, being able to fetch within the same file of that server component, still hiding the logic of that fetching. For this video, what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate the use of route handlers. And in this case, what we're going to actually do is we're going to scale a different level in terms of the fetching. First, what we'll do is we'll do the fetching within the client component, and then we'll kind of transform that into using route handler to demonstrate route handlers, and then continue to leverage route handlers, but then using a hook to fetch for that information. So that's going to be the different levels that we're going to go through in this video. So let's get started. So if you remember from the app, if you click on get started, it opens up the server component, fetches the information from all the countries REST API, and then we pass that data from our server component down to our client component that renders all of this. We added some functionalities so that if we click on it, it shows the country, the capital, and also the flag. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. We're going to reuse a lot of these components. So first, let's do some moving of files here because we don't want to redo things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder called components. And then I'm just going to move countries client component and country component that renders each country into components because we are going to reuse these components in this video. It's going to break it, but that's okay. We'll fix it. Okay, now that the app has adjusted and it looks like it's working, let's go ahead and test it one more time just to make sure everything is working as expected. As you can see, everything works. Click and everything shows as it should. Perfect. That's awesome. Go ahead and go back home. Let's make some adjustment to this front page because it's no longer accurate, right? We're not just doing server components. We're actually going to demonstrate client component fetching using route handlers. So let's go ahead and click this and make some update. Just call that server and client components. I'm going to go ahead and copy this code right here. And this one is going to take us to server component demo. This one is going to take us to route handling demo, and the route for this is actually going to be countries client because we're going to use a client component to do all the work. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to need margin in the bottom here. Let's add that now. All right, looks like we're ready to go. The only thing now is this route will not work, right? Because we currently do not have a route that takes us to countries client. So let's do that quick. Folder, file on here. Call it countries component or country. Yeah, let's do that. Countries, plural, because it's what's grabbing all of the country. Go ahead and save it. Let's click on route handling to make sure that it actually renders. Great. All right, so our next step is we're going to fetch the countries from this client component. Let's do this. Because we said we're going to use a client component, let's make sure we give it the use client directive. All right, so to do our fetching, let's go ahead and use the logic from our previous code. Let's grab it over here. What I'm going to do is in our client, we're going to leverage use state and use effect. Countries, state, and we'll set that to an empty array. Put that right down here, make it effect, and we just want that to go ahead and run when a component mounts. Just one time. We only need to do that one time. We're not doing multiple fetches. And I'm going to go ahead and paste the code here. All right, so we have here is we have a use effect that when the component mounts, it's going to run, do the fetching of all the countries from the REST API, and then it's going to set the data that we receive from the fetch to our country's state up here, okay? And then we're going to log it when it changes. So let's go ahead and save it to make sure that we're getting the data that we want. Awesome. So obviously the first time it was empty as far as countries is concerned. Fetch ran, and all of a sudden we have all the data that we need. All right, the next thing we need is we need to make sure that we feed that data to our country's client component, which is this component right over here, right? So let's go ahead and import that. If you remember, this component is expecting the countries, so let's go ahead and feed that countries. check that out. As you can see, our app is back to being functional. We actually don't need to console this anymore because we know that it works. But this is where route handlers come into play, because while this works perfectly how we want it to function and it's rendering what we need to render, the problem here is that once you have API keys involved, right? So a lot of APIs will require some sort of API key where you're exposing things, especially if it's something that you can't expose publicly. So route handlers is pretty useful, just like server components, where when you create a route handler, you're basically creating a server-side logic to handle what it is that you want to handle. What we're going to do next here is we're going to create a route handler, and there are a couple ways of doing it, but we're going to do it this way. So let's go ahead and create a folder here called get countries. I'm doing it within countries client because the assumption here is that the route handler that we're using is only serving this route, this part of the app, right? If it is something that is going to be serving other parts of your application, then you can have a different folder structure. But in this case, we're just going to do this. And then the way it works with NextJS 14 is you create a file called route.ts. That's convention there, expected convention, so that when you go to /countries client, which is this right here, countries client /get countries, it will serve that route. Okay, so let's go ahead, export. It's going to be an async function, and it's going to be a get request. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and grab the logic from over here, and since it's an async function, let's go away fetch, and then over here grab the data. Of course, we could probably use some error handling, but assumption is going to work, so we're not going to do that. And then we're just going to return your respond JSON string by data. Okay, so this is our route, right? Our route handler, rather, right? Where we're going to fetch a GET request to the countries API, and it's going to return to us the data that it receives. So let's go ahead and save that. And over here, instead of fetching that API, we can actually fetch from the route handler. So let's go ahead and let's countries client /get countries. And just to make sure we see this, let's console.log data, so you can see that it is now on the server side and not in the client side. And let's go ahead and click save here, and let's refresh. As you can see, it is consoling all the countries on our server, and it's no longer being consoled here on our client side. So that's how we know that it's server side. Let's get rid of that console because we don't need it anymore. And as you would expect, our app works, but now we have moved the logic outside or away from the client side and put it in the server side, where maybe API keys and other things are exposed that you don't want exposed to the client side. All right, so that worked pretty well. Again, the same thing, it's functioning exactly as we want it to. And yeah, so that's how route handlers work. But we're gonna do one more thing. Let's add another functionality here and leverage hooks in React. So what we're gonna do is, let's go ahead and create a library folder here. I know people do this differently, many ways. You can do it however you need to, and I know folder structure is different depending on the person or the team, and this is how I'm gonna do it. So I'm gonna create a hooks folder inside lib, and over here, I'm gonna make a file called use countries.ts, okay? So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna go export async function, use countries, and in here we're gonna have a local variable using use state called countries, set countries, and we will initialize that to empty. And then up here, we're just gonna grab this logic here, take it away, put that in here. Again, we don't need any dependencies because there's really nothing we're depending on any changes to fetch countries, so we don't need to do that. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to return countries. And over here on our main page and our client page, we no longer need this. But what we do need is countries from use countries. Import that. And let's make sure that it works. Let's go ahead and save it and let's refresh the page. All right, as you can see, our app did work exactly as expected. Let's make sure that it works properly, works exactly as expected as before. But now what we've done is we've leveraged a couple of different features that are very useful when it comes to building your front end, and you're also leveraging server-side logic, in that we have leveraged using route handlers, we have leveraged using hooks and moving things into the back end. And so we've simplified our code to where it's at now. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you found this useful. If you like the video, please hit subscribe, and thank you for watching.